Now, this week, the Mayor faced questions from the London Assembly about his draft annual budget. Londoners will be finding out just how much he's investing in the public services he funds. Bhavani Vadi has more.
It's the time of year when the Mayor's metaphorical piggy bank is opened up. He has a pot of nearly £16 billion at his disposal for the next financial year. Sadiq Khan is currently being grilled by the London Assembly on his spending plans for the public services that he funds, such as transport, the fire service, the work of City Hall and policing. He's had time to bed into the job. This is his second annual budget, and he's decided to raise his share of council tax, unlike his predecessor Boris Johnson, who held it down. While police spending fell under Boris Johnson, Sadiq Khan is using his council tax hike to maintain spending on police operations at around £3.3 billion.
The issue that stands out above all others in this budget is funding for the Metropolitan Police Service. Keeping Londoners safe is my top priority.
Despite this, next year there will be 2,000 fewer police officers in the capital. The Mayor has dropped the strategic target of 32,000 officers, which has been in place since 2012. He says that's due to government funding cuts in the face of increasing costs.
The government has forced the Met to make £600 million of cuts over recent years already. And the announcement on funding from the policing minister before Christmas was just smoke and mirrors.
The Mayor, instead of taking ownership of his own actions, is far too quick to blame everybody under the sun, whether it be his predecessor, or if he can't find a reason to blame him, he'll blame the government or the man on the moon, or anybody else but himself. The Mayor has the power to move funds around the GLA group, and he has not done so. So he could have maintained police officer numbers at a high level, and he hasn't. He's putting money into the London Fire Brigade rather than the police, and they will be putting that money straight into their reserves, so they won't be spending it on operational duties at all.
Transport is the other big issue in this budget. Overall spending for transport for London will drop slightly to around £9.5 billion. And this mayoral budget has highlighted some concerning pressures on TfL finances.
We've seen the Mayor over the last year cut some of the buses across London. We're seeing fewer buses on bus routes right across the capital. And yet his budget has a line saying we're going to get more revenue in from passengers on buses. It doesn't stack up.
TfL is expecting to receive £900 million less in money from passenger fares than was projected in the Mayor's budget just 2 years ago. And TfL's level of borrowing next year at just over £12 billion is more than its total budget. That means debt repayments of around £500 million in the next year alone.
You do need to invest in services in order to get income for the future. And one of the biggest pieces of investment that is underway at the moment is, of course, the development of Crossrail, the Elizabeth line, parts of which will start running at the end of this year. So there'll be a huge uplift in our passenger income.
This is a draft budget that's due to be finalised next month. The Mayor seems to have cross-party support from Assembly members on raising his share of council tax to fund policing. But there are questions over whether he's making the best use of the rest of the money in his piggy bank.
Well, joining us, Professor Tony Travers, leading expert in local government from the London School of Economics. Hello, Tony.
Hello.
You've seen plenty of these budgets in your time. What do you make of this one?
Well, there's definitely something, or a number of things that are new about it. We've heard about them in the film, really. One is the decision to, at least not to increase police spending significantly, but to stop the reduction in police spending that's been going on for a number of years now. Police grants have been cut, not only in London, and that's left police spending lower than it was 5, 6, 8 years ago. And what we've got here is a clear signal that the Mayor's willing to push up the council tax, the precept that he sets, in order to try to stop that reduction. But it's not going to lead to a big increase in police spending, and something similar is true for the fire brigade as well.
And that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because he's obviously worked out it's palatable to lift council tax, but actually you won't see more bobbies on the beat.
I think, just not only the Mayor, in fact, and the government, they both really agreed now that council tax needs to go up in order to pay for as I say, not a big increase in police spending, but at least to ensure it doesn't fall any further. And there is, however much politicians in different parties will argue that it's each of the other's case, the truth is the government and the mayor are kind of on the same side in being willing to put up the council tax in order, as I say, not massively to increase police spending, but at least to stop it falling any more.
Rupa, let me bring you in on this. The Mayor of London has somewhat blamed central government for funding cuts, but it's been his choice to scrap the strategic target of 32,000 police officers on the beat. That's his choice, isn't it?
I mean, in the film he pointed out that there's been £600 million of savings, as they euphemistically called. There's another 400 million coming between now and 2021. We've got a Conservative government that's very clever at displacing these cuts onto, even in Ealing we see that we have fortnightly bin collections now. Nobody came into politics because they wanted to do any of that stuff. But when there's sort of everything's being stretched thinner and thinner, people are trying to do more and more with less and less. He's kind of boxed into a corner and is running out of options. That's why the precept has to be raised, which is a courageous thing to do because Boris wouldn't do it.
Bob, let me bring you in on this. Government is responsible for 70% of funding of the Met. The fact that there's been 4 terror attacks last year, it's not a good look, is it, to cut funding?
Well, in fact, the government has protected police spending as a global figure. But what has happened is, of course, is that precisely because of the terrorist threats, more spending has to go onto those counter-terrorism issues. That has made less available for what we sometimes call more territorial or local policing. But I think that just reflects the pressures that we have as a society. But just one point, it's a bit rich, I think, for the mayor to start blaming government and asking for more money from government, when if you look at his draft budget figures, there's about £50 million unallocated. So he needs to get his own budget in order. He's not a good budgeter, and to start complaining about others when he's still not actually worked out what he's going to do with £50 million of money doesn't give you very much confidence in the sort of approach he's adopting.
Tony, let's come back to another aspect of it then, transport. We talked there about fare revenues going down. Is that something to worry about? The Mayor of London and team keep talking about the opening of the Elizabeth line and Crossrail. Is that going to boost anything?
Well, I mean, the Elizabeth line, Crossrail, was going to open and bring in, we hope, extra fares. It'll have to do that because part of the funding for Crossrail is to be paid for by has been paid for by borrowing, and that borrowing will now need to be serviced from here on in. But what's happened is that even before Crossrail has opened, there's been a big reduction in the yield of fares to TfL as compared with what was projected a couple of years ago, or even last year. Now, some of that will be because of the fares freeze that the Mayor introduced, but some of it is simply because passenger numbers, not only on the tube but also in buses and on the national rail system, have started to fall, and that's really an unusual thing and nobody was really predicting it.
And very briefly, what do you put that down to?
I think changing patterns of work, different people responding to the strikes that were being discussed earlier on.
The hopper bus fare, that's quite a good one, you can change.
You can. There are lots of reasons, but I think there's probably a bigger change going on in society about how people work, where they work, when they work, where they choose to live. And TfL and all of us will now have to cope with the fact that fare income may not continue to grow as it has done for many years, and that will be a challenge for TfL.
Rupa, how is TfL going to cope then?
It's true that he's kept to his promise of freezing the fares, which traditionally the Labour Party on the 1st of January does a campaign about your fares gone up. We have to differentiate in London this year.
It's only a partial freeze, though, on fares, isn't it?
It's for single fares, isn't it?
The original promise was a complete fare freeze. Of course, he couldn't possibly keep that. And
again, he's being attacked for doing that because people are saying some of these improvements won't happen. I think he's done it the right way, and it's a draft budget. Let's see what the real one.
But that fare freeze alone costs £640 million over 4 years.
But I think our constituents want that because they've seen fares go through the. I think again on the Govia story we had last, some of those routes, some of the ones to Kent, things have gone up 12% over Christmas. I mean,
I think our constituents also want to be able to get on the tube, and in consequence of this partial fare freeze, only a partial fare freeze, we've seen cancellations in other projects like the cancellation of 27 new trains on the Jubilee and Northern Lines. So this is actually going back to the old Gordon Brown approach to budgeting. You just make one point, Francis. You've got Sadiq and Val Shawcross saying, "Oh, we're borrowing to invest." Well, that's exactly what Gordon Brown Brown did and the fire mess that got us all into.
But
So
they-
it's just
Very
not
briefly.
There
clever
used to be a
budgeting.
thing called a TfL resource grant, which again George Osborne slashed. So a lot of this, it's sort of tinkering around stuff that
budget
comes.
in order first, he'd be
things
better
that
placed
come
to
from
ask
the
for more from
centre.
others.
We're going to have to
Well,
leave it
I've
there.
gone
I
now.
think we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. We do like to argue about a good old budget. Tony Travers, thank you very much for joining us.